The holidays are a time for friends, family, festivities, and food. Lots and lots of food. But what did people serve at holiday parties in decades past, in addition to mainstays like eggnog, gingerbread houses, and sugar cookies? The answers may challenge your Christmas spirit. Today, we're going to take a look at 15 crazy vintage food recipes to spice up your holiday party. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. After that, leave a comment and let us know what other holiday food topics you would like to hear about. Okay, time to let us help you bring a little kitsch to your kitchen. First up, we have the Holiday Fondue, brought to you by the good people at Ore-Ida Potatoes and Armour Star Ham. This so-called fondue is apparently more fun than the average fondue because it includes tater tots, which is pretty hard to argue with. To make it, you'll need tangy cheese sauce, tender cubes of Armour Star ham, and a whole mess of Ore-Ida tater tots. Just heat up the ham and tots in an oven for 12 to 15 minutes, heat your cheese sauce into a pan, and then pour it into a fondue dish. According to the advertisement, if you serve the fondue, your reputation as a great party giver is made. Well, we appreciate their enthusiasm. We recommend that if you are worried about your party giver rep, you should think about hosting an open bar, in addition to all the tater tots and cubed ham. The New England Yam Bake is brought to you by Kraft Marshmallows and Princella Yams, so you can probably guess at least 2 of the ingredients. The rest includes pineapple slices, flour, brown sugar, cinnamon, salt, chopped nuts, and margarine. Combine all that, bake for 25 minutes at 350 degrees, and you wind up with something very much like a sweet potato pie that serves 6 to 8 people. That actually sounds pretty good. Wonder when the next neighborhood yam bake is. Speaking of which, you're probably wondering what the New England in the name New England Yam Bake refers to. Well, yams aren't New England, and neither is the mallow plant, from which marshmallows derive their name. And both Kraft and the Princella Company are headquartered in Illinois, which is decidedly not New England. Just ask any Bears fan. So long story short, the name doesn't seem to refer to anything. It's just a play on a New England clam bake. Although there better not be any clams in this thing, or we riot. Next, from the makers of Cool Whip, the stuff that's almost but not quite whipped cream, comes the Winter Wonder Log. Although, generally speaking, a food log is never something you should have to wonder about. Naturally, the recipe begins with 3 cups of thawed Cool Whip, then calls for a cup of cold milk, exactly 38 thin chocolate wafers, and a package of Jell-O pistachio-flavored instant pudding and pie filling. Don't you dare put 39 thin chocolate wafers in there, unless you want to ruin the entire party. The blurb on the recipe boasts that nothing could be easier, but the picture of the finished product beside that blurb looks like something cooked up by a professional pastry chef, so proceed at your own risk. If you do give it a shot and you follow the directions correctly, the whole thing should turn out looking like a green and brown striped loaf that's coated from end to end in Cool Whip. It takes about 3 hours to prepare and should serve 8, which means plenty of pistachio Cool Whip log for everyone. What holiday party would be complete without cheese cones? If you're wondering what the hell cheese cones are, the answer is allegedly a festive new way to serve spreads made with Hellmann's mayonnaise. Mayonnaise and cheese hors d'oeuvres are sure to keep the party going until well after bedtime. For this one, you mix 4 3-ounce packages of cream cheese with 1/3 of a cup of mayonnaise, a 1/2 teaspoon of oregano, and 1/8 of a teaspoon of garlic powder. Chill the mixture, then, and we're serious here, mold it into a pine cone shape and garnish it with nuts. The final product should look like a mayonnaise blob with nuts all over it that vaguely resembles a pine cone. And if all that sounds yummy to you, there's also a version made with cheddar cheese, horseradish, Tabasco sauce, and of course, more mayo. I guess variety is the spice of life, or the mayonnaise of life, I guess. The recipe for Raisin Kitty Bars is brought to you by the California Raisin Advisory Board. Weird History food viewers might recognize that as the same organization responsible for the California Raisins, the popular claymation characters who sang Motown hits and commercials throughout the 1980s. Yeah, that was a thing. Gen Zers, you just have to take our word for it. The Raisin Kitty Bars are essentially cookies that contain raisins, cherries, coconut, and pecans that take about 45 minutes to make. Then you shake them like little gingerbread men, which, scientifically speaking, makes them more fun to eat. Have you ever been drinking a Dr. Pepper and thought to yourself, this would be so much better if it was boiling hot? If so, we've got some good news for you. In 1968, the Dr. Pepper Company promoted a unique twist on spiced cider and other warm wintertime beverages by suggesting their customers serve Dr. Pepper steaming hot. The recipe is pretty simple. You just heat up some Dr. Pepper in a saucepan until it begins to steam, then pour it into a glass over a thin slice of lemon. That doesn't sound half bad. Is there booze in it? Well, I guess that's up to you. The recipe is illustrated with a picture of a snowman holding a piping hot glass, despite the clear threat it poses to his well-being. A testament to the irresistible taste of hot Dr. Pepper. The peppermint popcorn tree might sound more like an Arbor Day treat, but take one look at it and it's clear this bizarre popcorn and marshmallow concoction is a Christmas miracle. This recipe, brought to you by Caro Syrup, starts with 14 cups of popcorn. You'll then have to prepare a candy mixture that's mostly Caro syrup, sugar, and vanilla. Then throw in 32 regular-sized marshmallows and a teaspoon of peppermint flavoring. Add in your popcorn and stir. Once that's all mixed up, you press it into a pan and wait for it to cool. Then cut it into several pieces of 4 different sizes and stack them largest to smallest. Finally, decorate the unique confection with candies and candles and serve. If you do it right, you should wind up with something that looks vaguely like a miniature marshmallow-coated Christmas tree. If you're planning on trying out this slightly complicated recipe, note that Caro syrup is also widely known as a home remedy for constipation. So you might want to stick close to home base, or give it away to coworkers you don't like. Lots of people have coffee with dessert, but have you ever had coffee for dessert? Okay, sure, there's always good old-fashioned coffee cake, but if you've ever wanted to try something a little more outside the box, the people at Martinson's Coffee have got you covered. They came up with a recipe for something they call Coffee Charlotte, which kind of sounds like a pop-punk band hitting middle age. To prepare, soak a tablespoon of gelatin in a half a cup of strong cold coffee. Then add a cup of strong hot coffee. Throw in 4 tablespoons of sugar and stir. Once the mixture is cooled, add 2 egg whites, a pinch of salt, and a 1/4 pint of whipped cream. Pour that into a mold and then chill. When that's done, you'll have 6 servings of what looks basically like coffee-flavored Jell-O. Thanks, but I'll pass. Martinson's recipe included a long-defunct order form for 22 more coffee-based desserts. We have no way of knowing what those may have been, but we can recklessly throw out some guesses. Coffee cobbler, maybe, or hot coffee pie. Along with the holiday fondue, Campbelled Eggs proves that if you name your dish a charming pun, nobody will think too hard about what's actually in it. Brought to you by the fine folks at Campbell's Soup, Campbelled Eggs are scrambled eggs, holiday style. What does that mean? Well, it apparently just means scrambled eggs with a can of Campbell's Soup dumped into the mix. The recipe calls for 8 eggs, a dash of pepper, 2 tablespoons of butter, and a can of cream of chicken soup. And if cream of chicken doesn't spread enough holiday cheer for you, cream of celery, cream of mushroom, cream of potato, or New England clam chowder can also be substituted. Kind of feels like they spent way more time coming up with a name than designing the recipe. Soupy eggs don't have much to do with the holidays, unless you're drunk at Waffle House on Christmas Eve. Del Monte's Party Fruit Basket recipe is the ultimate holiday fruitcake. It calls for 1 large angel food cake, 4 cups of drained and chilled Del Monte fruit cocktail syrup, some unflavored gelatin, water, sugar, lemon juice, almond extract, and whipped cream. Despite the name, you won't need an actual basket. The cake is the basket. First, soften the gelatin in water, add it to the syrup, and throw in the sugar and lemon juice. Stir that up and add the fruit and almond extract. Then chill the mixture until it's almost set. Finally, cut the center out of the cake and spoon the mixture into the hole. Chill that overnight, garnish it with whipped cream, and voila! You have got yourself a party fruit basket that will likely be politely ignored by most of your partygoers, just like the vegetable tray. From the makers of pistachio-flavored Jell-O comes a dessert that sounds like someone desperately throwing together a dessert using whatever was left in the cupboard. Jell-O ginger ale salad is the perfect addition to any holiday get-together, particularly ones you don't intend to be invited back to next year. Dissolve 1 package of lime Jell-O into a cup of water. Add in some ginger ale and then chill. Once it thickens, fold in a cup of drained, diced sweetened peaches, some diced celery, and chopped nuts. Pour that into a 1-quart mold, chill until firm, and then serve it on lettuce, with either mayonnaise or whipped cream mayonnaise, which is a real thing we in no way made up. The finished dessert sounds like a mix between Jell-O, potato salad, and ambrosia fruit salad. The recipe claims your whole family will love it, but it fails to cite any sources. Happy holidays and bon appetit! In 1929, a massive stock market crash ushered in the nearly decade-long worldwide economic depression that would prove to be the most prolonged and widespread in recent history. The rise of refrigeration, changes in the food supply chain, and the increased need for inexpensive meals led to a drastic change in the American diet. Getting food on the table was tough, and sometimes using what was available led to some rather strange recipes. Today, we're looking at the weird foods people ate to get through the Great Depression. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt wasn't going to let the Depression bring her fellow Americans down. As an early supporter of the home economics movement, she planned inexpensive and nutritious meals from Cornell's home economics department. Although FDR was a bit of a gourmand, both the First Lady and the President practiced leaner eating habits during the Great Depression. According to their book, A Square Meal, A Culinary History of the Great Depression, food historians Jane Ziegelman and Andrew Coe noted the Roosevelts ate this way to send a message to Americans about how to eat during troubling times. Instead of foie gras or an amuse-bouche, FDR had to eat simple meals, at least when guests or the press were around. Denture-friendly fare like deviled eggs and tomato sauce with mashed potatoes or a bean and tomato stew were typical White House fare. Sounds like something you'd find at the frozen dinner aisle. Flavor and spices need not apply. Dessert came in the form of prune whip, a delightful dish based around everyone's favorite dried fruit, the prune. Prunes and other dried fruit were common substitutes for fresh fruit during the Depression, so prune pudding was sort of an easy substitute for freshly baked pies or other desserts. It's easy to make, too. All you need is some sugar, egg whites, and a bunch of prunes. Whip it all together, and you'll have a real, regular dessert in no time. Everyone loves peanut butter, and everyone loves onions, right? Both items were readily available during the Depression, and someone decided to mix the two. This resulted in a most surreal concoction from the Great Depression cookbook, peanut butter stuffed baked onion. Okay? Promoted by the Bureau of Home Economics, the recipe for peanut butter and stuffed onions saw publication in several newspapers and magazines of the period. The Bureau's professional home economists actively encouraged American homemakers to serve the inexpensive glop to their families. Food historians Andrew Coe and Jane Ziegelman decided to try making the dish themselves more recently. Coe said it was not a popular addition to the dinner table. Ziegelman put it more succinctly, noting that peanut butter has nothing to say to a baked onion. The Bureau of Home Economics really took the phrase, "there's no accounting for taste," literally when they came up with that one. Ritz crackers? They're no townhouse cracker, but they are great for a light snack or handy to use in a dip.
Good cracker.
But they have an unlikely alternate use, a substitute for apple pie filling. Ritz mock apple pie is pretty much what it sounds like, a pie made with Ritz crackers as its filling. The traditional ingredients of an apple pie combined with lemon juice and the unique texture of Ritz crackers created a taste intended to simulate a real apple pie. Considered a Depression-era favorite today, this pastry imposter has its roots in the 1880s, when apple shortages called for pie-filling substitutes. Soda crackers were a cheap alternative to America's favorite fruit, and mock apple pies were popular during tough times. At some point, Nabisco began putting the recipe on the back of Ritz cracker boxes, where it would remain until the 1980s. After 1,500 requests for the recipe in a single year, the company restored the recipe to its packaging in 1991. It remains one of Ritz's most requested recipes today. If an apple-free apple pie sounds tasty, you can try making one yourself. Just substitute 36 slightly crushed Ritz crackers for the apples in your favorite recipe. and you'll be baking a mock pie just in time for dessert. Eleanor Roosevelt did her best to promote home economics throughout the Depression. That didn't mean she didn't send out some genuinely bizarre dishes during that time. Take the case of an off-putting casserole made from spaghetti, boiled carrots, and white sauce. Unlike traditional pasta cooking methods, this recipe required cooking the spaghetti for a full 25 minutes. Once the pasta turned into a sad noodle mush, you were supposed to mix it with similarly boiled-to-death carrots. A bland white sauce made from milk, flour, salt, and butter topped off this not-quite al dente dish. Roosevelt called it a vehicle for nutrition and nutrients, but you'd probably prefer to eat an old flapper hat instead. Vinegar-based desserts were popular in the 19th century, but made a comeback during the Depression. Known more commonly as desperation pies, these treats mix staple ingredients like eggs, butter, and sugar with some kind of substitution. In this case, apple cider vinegar takes the place of fresh apples. It's the fantastic acidic flavor of an apple cobbler without any pesky fruit. Cooks can whip the eggs and sugar into a delicious meringue to top the acidic dessert off in style. Apparently, it tastes like salt and vinegar custard, and it leaves the roof of your mouth tingling. If you find yourself with a hankering for vinegar cobbler, don't despair. In 2015, award-winning chef Chris Shepard began serving the dish in his Houston restaurants, helping vinegar cobbler make a comeback in recent years. In a recipe straight from the Haywire Mac songbook, mulligan stew was basically hobo food. Not to be confused with NBC's short-lived 1977 comedy of the same name.
Our two families became one after a tragic plane crash in Hawaii.
Mulligan stew is a community food put together by whatever foods they could scavenge and put together. In his book, Riding the Rails, Teenagers on the Move During the Great Depression, Errol Lincoln Hughes describes the dish as a mix of just about everything. People predominantly cook mulligan stew with stolen onions, corn, potatoes, foraged greens, and occasional meat bits. Enterprising hobo chefs might add a handful of navy beans or whatever else may add some flavor to the dish. But the real secret ingredient was just a bit of Bull Durham tobacco. And everyone's favorite flavor enhancer, lint. That's a meal I may not ask for seconds on. Dining at the White House during the Great Depression wasn't exactly fancy. Take the case of milcorno. On one presumably dark and stormy night in 1933, several mad scientists at Cornell University invented a gruel known as milcorno. It's alive! Scientists intended for this blend of powdered skim milk, cornmeal, and salt to help families stretch food budgets. Milcorno came with the somewhat dubious promise of enabling meals for a family of 5 for $5 a week. And of course, Eleanor Roosevelt served it at the White House. But milcorno wasn't the only milk, cornmeal, and salt-based food supplement. There was also milquito and milkoto, both of which were purchased in bulk by the government. The government even bought 25 million pounds of dystopian dust to use in various hunger relief efforts. And although all of them turn into porridge after boiling, the Bureau of Home Economics inexplicably suggested that milcorno made a good substitute for the noodles and chop suey. Well, at least there isn't much toxicity in such things. Despite some of the strange things people had to eat during the Depression, one modern culinary staple arose in the midst of it all. The one and the only Kraft macaroni and cheese dinner. According to the Smithsonian, Thomas Jefferson famously served macaroni and cheese at an 1802 state dinner after falling in love with the dish while visiting France. It wasn't an entirely new concept at the time, but the idea of boxing it and selling it as an inexpensive meal was. In 1937, a rogue salesman for the St. Louis-based Tenderoni Macaroni Company began selling his noodles with packets of Kraft grated cheese attached. Kraft soon hired the enterprising salesman to promote the meal to cash-strapped Americans. The dinner caught on in a big way, selling for 19 cents per 4 servings. Its speed was a selling point, with one early print ad featuring a happy, bewildered husband asking, "How the deuce did you make this keen macaroni and cheese so fast? Why, we just got home." Kraft's dinner, as it's known in the Great White North, went on to become a staple of modern college cuisine and has a special place in our hearts today. Food historians typically agree that loaves were quite popular during the Great Depression. Food loaves were made from a central ingredient and cheaper ingredients that would stretch the entire thing out. A Depression-era menu might contain such delicacies as a liver loaf, lima bean, and peanut loaf. Authentic meatloaf was a luxury, but still relatively affordable by padding it with other ingredients like crackers or bread. And much like today, ketchup and canned soup delivered more flavor at a small additional cost. Food historian Ziegelman & Co. baked some soy and lima bean loaf, maintaining it tastes a bit like falafel, but should be served with lots of highly seasoned gravy. Some historians believe the federal government made a mistake by overlooking immigrants' contribution and creativity to hunger relief efforts during the Great Depression. Italian immigrants were sometimes known for making delicious, highly nutritious, and inexpensive foods for their families. Yet the government chose to overlook their methods as a source of hunger relief inspiration. One delicious and vitamin-packed ingredient foraged by Italian immigrant women in New York City came in the form of dandelion greens. Straight from the front yard to the dinner table, dandelion greens were added to salads, sautéed, or cooked with olive oil to create an essentially free meal. If you needed a cheap source of protein during the 1930s, gelatin was likely your main ingredient. Many Depression-era cookbooks feature gelatin as a base for such cutting-edge recipes as corned beef luncheon salad and other congealed salads.
Bright, crisp vegetables in cool, shimmering Jell-O. There's a salad for you.
Congealed salads may sound like the name of a band from the 90s, but they were authentic dishes people ate during tough times. Corned beef luncheon salad was particularly repulsive, with its unholy mix of its canned corned beef, gelatin, canned peas, vinegar, and lemon juice. A few reports from individuals courageous enough to try today describe it as wrong in every way possible, just from the color to the smell, the texture, the flavor, the mouthfeel. It may look, smell, and probably taste like canned cat food, but one simply cannot deny gelatin's versatility in cooking.
Have you made a Jell-O salad lately? Well, do this week.
Hey, there is always room for a Jell-O salad. Got milk? The people struggling to survive through the Great Depression certainly did. Milk also piqued nutritionists' interest, who placed tremendous importance on it as a kind of superfood. Cow's milk was a bit of a wonder food at the time. Packed with vitamins, fats, sugar, and proteins, it served nutritional needs and practical purposes during the period. Milk was also used in tons of recipes from the time, from flavorless white sauces and cornstarch pudding to fortified foods like milk corno. Of course, the sheer amount of milk given to school-age kids was quite impressive, as the government advised nearly a quart a day. School lunches almost always featured a nice glass of milk to go along with the day's meal. Chipped or frizzled beef has been a breakfast choice in some parts of the United States since the 19th century, eventually finding its way into a 1910 military cookbook called Manual for Military Cooks. Since then, the creamed chipped beef on toast has been an Army staple with a colorful name, Shit on a Shingle, or SOS. The old frontier favorite enjoyed a resurgence during the Depression. Per culinary historians Ziegelman & Co., this era's version was a combination of canned corned beef, plain gelatin, canned peas, vinegar, and lemon juice, and wrong in every possible way. That doesn't mean some folks aren't nostalgic for SOS today. SOS was often served during the Second World War, and even the TV show MASH used it as a recurring joke.
You've forgotten your shingle, Doctor.
Nothing says America quite like hot dogs. Everyone's favorite processed meat product was a surprisingly versatile ingredient during times of scarcity. Although many Depression-era recipes that incorporate hot dogs had bleak names like Poor Man's Stew or Hoover Stew, they made for surprisingly good recipes. Sliced hot dog rounds with cooked macaroni, cans of stewed tomatoes, and canned corn or peas from time to time. Modern cooks are hard at work reclaiming Hoover Stew these days, occasionally substituting fancier ingredients for yesteryear's canned vegetables. Bon appetit! Perhaps nothing was more decadent about French aristocrats before the Revolution than their over-the-top meals. Aristocrats of France's ancient regime, or Old Order, tended to have elaborate meals, thanks to the fact that they could afford it. They procured expensive ingredients and hired master chefs to create mouth-watering dishes, while everyone else in the country starved. Today, we're looking at some of the frivolous foods eaten by the French aristocracy as the peasants went hungry. Okay, time to let them eat cake and chocolate and a bunch of other fancy stuff too. When Marie Antoinette, a young princess from Vienna who became the final queen of France before the Revolution, first arrived at court, she didn't come alone. In her retinue was none other than her personal chocolate chef, which is quite possibly the wealthiest thing we've ever heard. Among the many concoctions he whipped up for the queen was chocolate with orange blossoms, which yielded a rich, citrusy flavor. Marie Antoinette's love of chocolate was hardly unique among the old-timey crowd. Men, women, and children in the 18th century had become wild about chocolate, and it was a treat reserved for the upper class. Louis XIV's Palace of Versailles was basically an aristocratic universe of ritual and decadence, with Louis firmly at the center. Like the king himself, who took dinner alone in his chambers in a highly ritualized manner, the courtiers of Versailles ate well. The food was just as over the top as their costumes and hairstyles, especially since aristocrats tried to one-up each other with their menus, like a pre-revolution master chef. For example, included on the menu at the Marquis de Louvois' banquet in 1690 were poached truffles. Truffles, which are decadent and expensive even today, would have been a delicious treat for the Marquis's hyper-privileged guests. Interestingly, in the preceding centuries, aristocrats wouldn't have been caught dead eating truffles. Because they came from the ground, they were considered to be peasant food. Basically, truffles were strictly for the poors, until the moment a rich person tried one. Sort of like rabbit, lobster, and living in a tiny apartment in Manhattan. Oysters are a popular modern-day treat, but the aristocrats of pre-revolutionary France really went wild for them. Getting oysters and other seafood to the tables of the ruling class was no easy feat. Fishermen and sellers in Paris developed a system over time that got seafood to the Paris markets early in the morning, so that it could reach the aristocrats later in the day. So beloved were oysters amongst French high society that ensuring one's employer had a ready supply of them was sometimes a stressful task. One chef, François Vatel, actually offed himself with his own sword after a delivery for a banquet failed to arrive. It might have been less an honor thing and more of a I'd rather die than keep dealing with a thing. Oddly enough, the period leading up to the French Revolution saw an increase in the number of cookbooks that were published. But these definitely were not like modern-day cookbooks. Directions were often vague, and they did not use standard measurements. Add a Thackeray of smudge and steam your bobbies for no less than a quarter turn of the jerry tree. So, like a teaspoon? Is this food or a paint recipe? Still, these cookbooks are a window into the world of gourmet cooking in the 18th century, especially as chefs tried to appeal to the elite's appetite for novelty foods that would surprise their guests. One such dish was the delicious-sounding chicken in bagpipes. However, rather than a woodwind instrument stuffed with the Colonel's 11 herbs and spices, this dish involved chickens that were cooked in lamb bladders, which the cook was supposed to inflate, like bagpipes. Contrary to popular belief, Marie Antoinette was never really comfortable with the elaborate public dinners that had become ritualized at Versailles. In fact, she rarely ate in public and preferred to eat in private. But occasionally, she was known to have some decadent meals from time to time. Among them was breaded foie gras, duck or goose liver, which is considered as decadent as it is unappetizing. Organ meat rolled in panko? Oh, no thanks. I ate on the way to the palace. As Louis XV's mistress, Madame de Pompadour was one of the most influential women of the 18th century. But her power extended far beyond the royal bedchamber. As a patron of the arts, she often entertained and even employed her own chef. Among the food prepared for Pompadour and her guests was stomachs of riverside birds with sand leek sauce. The only thing tastier than a bird stomach is a bird stomach full of sandy vegetable juice. As truly unappetizing as it sounds, it's also an important lesson. By the middle of the 18th century, the elite class in France often crafted their menus for the effect and shock value, rather than the food itself. Sort of like if Marilyn Manson became a celebrity chef. If history shows us anything, it's that rich people get bored very easily. Though all expensive wines were welcome at Versailles, one towered over the rest: champagne. Following techniques introduced by a 17th century monk named Dom Perignon, the name primarily associated with champagne today, champagne became a popular drink among the purse-laden. Specifically, Louis XIV notably loved champagne, though the bubbly beverage's popularity at Versailles would outlast the Sun King. Rumor has it that Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette rang in the new year with champagne, which would mean they started a New Year's tradition that continues to this day. Drinking water in an age before mass purification could be a risky business. One sip of the wrong batch could send you swiftly to your deathbed. So it's no surprise that Marie Antoinette was persnickety about her water, especially after she discovered the only water that did not make her ill came from a spring at Ville d'Avray, near Versailles. She refused to drink water from any other source. And while the spring was only a few miles away from the palace, someone still had to go fetch it for her on a regular basis. And that someone's name was definitely not Marie Antoinette. She was even allowed Ville d'Avray's water when she was imprisoned during the French Revolution. Now that is privilege. I wonder what vintage her toilet wine was. Brioche has a long history. The word was actually first used all the way back in the 15th century. But brioche as a rich, buttery bread began to develop in the 18th century. French aristocrats in particular fell hard for this hunk of starchy goodness. The elite class could afford more butter and flour, so their brioches were far richer and more heavenly than those of the peasant classes. The croquette, a savory breaded roll filled with meat, was hardly unique to France. In fact, versions of it exist in one form or another all around the world. But François Massulot, one of the talented chefs working at Versailles, developed his own version, and the recipe appears in his cookbook, first published in 1691. Massulot's version was stuffed with a ragout, but he also made it with truffles and cream cheese. Dinner in the pre-revolution court wasn't just a social occasion. It could be an aesthetic experience for royal foodies, even before Instagram. As such, how food was presented was part of the pleasure of dining. One cookbook from the 18th century includes a recipe for pumpkin soup that was to be served in a hollowed-out pumpkin that had been coated with meringue. Eating a novelty dish out of an actual jack-o'-lantern sounds like something you'd find in Flavortown, but it would have been featured at the highest of high society feasts in France. Speaking of meringue, like many foods, historians can't quite pin down the origins of the sweet treat. Some even claim that Queen Maria Leszczyńska, the Polish wife of King Louis XV, brought meringue with her to the French court. But wherever it came from originally, it was a regular fixture at Versailles. Rumor also had it that Marie Antoinette loved to eat meringue. Let them eat meringue. Yeah, that doesn't have the same ring to it, does it? Kind of sounds like an exhausted wedding DJ. One of the most important names associated with French pastries is Nicolas Strauer. Strauer got his work starting in the Polish royal court, and when Princess Maria Leszczyńska traveled to France to marry the young King Louis XV, Strauer came with her. You know you'd bring your personal cake chef if you had one. Strauer introduced the baba cake to the Versailles court, and they went mad for it. Baba, which is simply the French word for what is essentially a Polish bundt cake, was a cake that was soaked in fortified wine. If you were a sugar junkie or an alcoholic, and royal courts tended to be full of both, this was the stuff of dreams. The many-layered millefeuille, also known today as Napoleons, was a specialty of 18th century pastry chefs. After all, the elite were attracted to delicate foods in the 18th century, and there was perhaps nothing more delicate than a multi-layered pastry. The 18th century version differed from the modern one in a key respect. Instead of cream holding together each layer, 18th century pastry chefs used jam, like a bougie PB&J. Queen Maria Leszczyńska may not have received much love in her own lifetime, considering her husband King Louis XV was infamous for keeping mistresses. But she had a big part in the evolution of French cuisine. In fact, one popular dish from the court of Versailles was even named in her honor. Bouchée à la reine is a savory pastry typically made with chicken and mushrooms, although it can also include veal sweetbreads or ham, or even seafood if you're feeling it. Having a scrumptious dish named in your honor almost does make up for the fact that your husband tried to sleep with every woman in France. Almost. As America grew and expanded throughout the 19th century, the 1848 discovery of gold in California led to the first major gold rush in American history. By 1849, thousands of prospectors, who had come to be known as 49ers, came to the area in hopes of striking it rich. But life in the region was harsh, and resources were scarce. But the gold miners were nothing if not resourceful, and managed to not only pack well for their excursions, but create some unique cuisine along the way. Today, we're sampling the eclectic foods prospectors ate to survive during the gold rush. The cry of, "There's gold in them thar hills," echoed loudly in the minds and spirits of America's 19th century prospectors. Between 1848 and 1864, over 300,000 people flocked to the Sierra Nevada mountains during the California Gold Rush. A small town near the foothills known as Old Dry Diggins had recently been renamed Hangtown after a series of hangings in the town square. The town was later rechristened Placerville. Hangtown Fry originated when a miner struck gold near the town at the height of the gold rush. Afterward, he went straight to the nearest saloon, the El Dorado Hotel, and asked for the most expensive meal they had. The cook made him a fancy omelet complete with bacon and oysters. That's like going to Denny's after winning the lottery and getting a shrimp side with your moons over my hammy. The miner apparently loved the dish, and it became a popular recipe known as the Hangtown Fry. The dish grew more popular, finding its way onto the menus of restaurants across the country. It even found a place on New York's membership-only breakfast club at Club 21, and was once featured on the first-class menu of American Airlines. It's easy to make, too. All you need is an egg, some breadcrumbs, oil, bacon, and milk. Oh, and 3 medium-sized oysters, of course. Speaking of seafood... A few decades after the California Gold Rush ended, the Yukon Gold Rush brought 100,000 prospectors to the Great Frozen North in search of precious metal. Even in the frozen white north, seafood wasn't always available. But even when it was, prospectors used salmon to make hearty soups and stews. The heartiness of a stew provided a filling meal that lasted for a few days. Recipes vary, but one recipe from Jay Moynihan's The Good Time Girl's Guide to Gold Rush Cuisine provides a modern take on this Gold Rush meal with a dish called Dutch Kate's Salmon Stew. In addition to salmon, the stew calls for milk, butter, flour, salt, and some pepper. Exactly the type of fare a Yukon miner would have eaten at the time. The modern recipe calls for canned or fresh salmon, but Yukon miners would have gone with a fresh catch as they trudged across the tundra in search of gold. For prospectors during the California Gold Rush, manufactured yeast wasn't easy to come by, so they had to get creative when it came to baking bread. For all you pandemic bakers, this'll sound familiar. Enter the sourdough starter. Everyone's favorite pandemic hobby had its origins in San Francisco during the Gold Rush, when miners discovered a way to make their bread softer and fluffier. According to writer Ed Wood, a true sourdough is nothing more than flour and water with wild yeast to make it rise and special bacteria to provide the flavor. But miners during the Gold Rush had a trick up their sleeve. They mixed flour and water together, then added some sugar. Then they kept that mixture warm to allow it to ferment. Sometimes miners kept their starters warm by cuddling with them at night and keeping them close to their bodies. Once fermented, prospectors used these starters to make sourdough bread. Sometimes, potatoes and poppy seeds were added to give the bread extra flavor and crunch. Sounds like something Whole Foods would sell for $15 a loaf. Sourdough bread became a San Francisco standard, where it's still popular today. During the Gold Rush, it wasn't uncommon to find turtle meat on the menu in some gold mining towns. Importers saw the sudden influx of settlers into California as a chance to capitalize on importing tortoises and turtles for food. From sea turtles to the giant Galapagos tortoise, these unlikely reptiles found their way onto the plates and menus of California settlers throughout the Gold Rush. It started small, with about 122 tortoises being imported to San Francisco in 1849, but blossomed into a burgeoning trade. At one point, a ship brought 500 of the unfortunate reptiles to the city to be used as food. Turtle steak, soup, pies, and even baked goods were popular meals at the time. But some folks preferred the organ meats the most. Captain Thomas Crapo, yeah, that's his real name, loved turtle organ meat so much, He wrote about it in his diary, saying it was far superior to any kind of meat I ever ate. Eventually, tortoise meat fell out of favor, but the damage was already done. Galapagos Island tortoise population significantly declined because of this, and many of the tortoise species exploited for their meat are still recovering today. Good job, crapo. During the Klondike Gold Rush, inventive miners used wildflowers and herbs to flavor otherwise bland foods. Syrup, soup, mashes, and spices all benefited from adding a few herbs. One such substance Klondike explorers loved was squaw honey, a syrup made from wild clover and other flowers. As a 6-foot-high weed growing in the wild clover was easy to spot in the warmer months, making it a good choice for cooking. There weren't any bees in Alaska, so harvesting real honey was out of the question. But the flowers contained sweet nectar that approximated the flavor of the sticky treat. But other plants offered unique flavors as well. The Gold Rush wasn't just a time of people settling the West. It also ushered in some of our modern industrial practices. Commercially preserved foods were starting to be distributed around that time, despite preservation methods existing for centuries before. Dried apples or salted beef, for instance, were common provisions for settlers at the time, so it made sense to apply these methods to other foods. In the Yukon, miners used preserving techniques to make a type of food the native Alaskans already enjoyed: kelp relish. Relish, a cooked and pickled mix of vegetables and herbs, can be made from a lot of different ingredients. Making relish involved combining salt water, onion, lemon, pickling spice, brown sugar, vinegar, and kelp together until it was well blended. Then it could be eaten all at once or stored for later use. Reports from the period and more modern recipes point to it being a delicious dish, but you probably wouldn't want to put it on a hot dog. In Alaska, they used kelp, a large type of seaweed that grew along the coast. Harvesting the stuff fresh wasn't always easy, so preserving it provided the freedom to travel longer distances with a ready supply of relish. Throughout the Yukon Gold Rush, plants were the ingredient that kept on giving. A large shrub called Devil's Club was a tough, thorny plant that grew all along the Yukon and down to the California coast. It was tall, dense, and a pain in the butt to harvest, but it worked great as a spice, assuming you picked the leaves when they were young and under 2 inches long. With a nickname like Alaskan ginseng, you'd think it'd be energizing and refreshing. To some extent it was. In her cookbook, Gold Rush Grub, From Turpentine Stew to Hoochinoo, Anne Chardonnay described the plant's unique flavor variations. It could be nibbled raw. The buds taste like intensely herbal celery leaves. Cooked, they are reminiscent of the edible bases of artichoke leaves. Hey, at least it's better than eating thistles. If celery-flavored plants weren't your thing, there was always nettle soup. Nettles are one of the first plants to show signs of growth after snow melts, so cooking them became common practice throughout the Gold Rush. Native Americans used the tough and fibrous stems of the plant to weave baskets and make fishing nets. But the leaves made a pretty good soup, tasting like spinach or cabbage when cooked. Nettles served as a good alternative to otherwise unavailable greens, and the soup could be thickened with starch or mixed with spices to give it a bit of a kick. But these original plant-based meals were only the tip of the culinary iceberg. Settlers came from all over the world to seek their fortune in the Gold Rush. Many of them brought their traditional recipes with them. Take the case of the Cornish pasty. With a recipe hailing from Cornwall, England, the Cornish pasty is essentially a savory meat pie. They contain meat and potatoes that are wrapped in a pastry shell prior to being cooked. Once cooked, the edges of the pasty are crimped, and it resembles an apple turnover. In a traditional pasty, the filling is usually minced meat and vegetables that are cooked prior to being placed in the shell. The dish is still quite popular today in the town of Grass Valley, California, where it's a prominent fixture at restaurants and eateries all over the city. Speaking of meat pies, if you were looking for meat during the Yukon Gold Rush, the most likely way to get it was by hunting the moose of the Great White North. Moose lived in large numbers throughout the Great Alaskan Wilderness at the time, making them prime game for the prospectors who went out there. Eating the meat was a different story. While some ate it normally, others made savory moose meat pies. One recipe used cubes of moose steak as its base. Another called for the layering of ground moose meat, potatoes, celery, and onions in a pan to make a sort of moose meat casserole. Moose meat has a unique texture and flavor, making it a special treat for hungry prospectors in the Yukon Territory. Searching the hills for gold wasn't the only thing folks were doing during California's gold rush. They picked up another food-related practice: egg poaching. Chicken eggs were scarce in California, costing up to $1 per egg. Stores put up "Eggs Wanted" signs in their windows. An 1857 ad in the Sonoma County Journal read, "Wanted, butter and eggs for which the highest price will be paid." To say San Franciscans wanted eggs would be an understatement. The Farallon Islands, just off the coast of San Francisco, were home to large seabird populations that became a prime target for hungry businessmen looking to make a profit off the birds' valuable eggs. A San Francisco pharmacist, Doc Robinson, sailed to the islands with his brother-in-law to poach the eggs. There they faced difficult terrain and slick rocks that were hard to climb, because of all the bird guano covering them. Despite losing half of their haul on the return trip, they still pocketed $3,000 from selling the eggs they actually managed to bring back. Robinson swore to never return. But that didn't stop other poachers from waging an all-out war with each other over retrieving eggs from the island. The eggs of a small penguin-like bird called the murre were highly sought after due to being twice the size of a chicken egg. These eggs almost single-handedly led to a 3-decade-long fight over the egging rights to the islands. 6 men sailed to the islands and staked a claim of possession under the name Pacific Egg Company in 1851. This angered everyone else, and the egg wars became increasingly violent, until the government stepped in to give Pacific Egg Company rights to the island. And that went over about as well as you might expect. Fights over the eggs continued to decimate bird populations and wreak havoc on the environment. Eventually, chicken farmers came along and effectively ended the 30-year-long struggle over the Farallon Islands. And the murre population is thriving today. English monkey is another name for the common Welsh dish, Welsh rabbit. The story goes that the name Welsh rabbit was originally intended as an insult from the English to the Welsh. When the Welsh settlers headed to the U.S. to participate in the gold rush, they struck back at the English by calling the dish English monkey. Take that, Great Britain! Neither Welsh rabbit nor English monkey contains any rabbits or monkeys. Instead, it's a kind of cheese sauce with breadcrumbs, cheese, milk, and eggs. The sauce gets poured over crackers or thick slices of toast, and you eat it with a knife and fork. Classy. Pass the Grey Poupon, please. The dish doesn't take long to make either, according to an 1897 cookbook called Practical Vegetarian Cookery. Just soak a cupful of breadcrumbs in milk for 10 minutes. Melt some butter over it, and add some cheese. Stir in an egg, salt, and some soda, then serve on wafers. The cheesy and somewhat pasty consistency notwithstanding, the dish is a popular pub food in Great Britain and is enjoyed best with a pint of your favorite beer. For 2 years in the mid-1800s, Colorado had its own gold rush. The Pikes Peak Gold Rush brought a cadre of miners to the mountain state. What they didn't account for, though, were the harsh, high-altitude conditions and the extremely frigid winters. Colorado winters are the worst. But if there's one thing Colorado mountains are known for, it's the bighorn sheep. And if there's one thing prospectors in the area were known for, it was being hungry. You can probably see where this is going. Prospectors hunted the bighorn sheep, stockpiled them, and sold the meat and furs at trading posts. There was a high demand for the muscular animals, and their meat was roasted over fires. This ended up with the sheep being hunted almost to the point of extinction. That, along with habitat destruction, further reduced their numbers to the point that hunting them today is highly regulated. There is perhaps no other country on Earth more identified with its cuisine than Italy. Just hearing the name Italy makes us hungry for pizza, pasta, and Parmesan. Food has always been an integral part of Italian culture, ever since medieval times when wealthy Italians built literal towers of edible delicacies and watched as hungry peasants fought each other for scraps, all for their twisted amusement. Today, we're going to see how rich people in Italy used food to watch poor people fight over their scraps. From heaven to cloudy with a chance of meatballs, we wish for food to be raining down from the sky. In fact, in medieval Europe, many stories were written about the land of cocaine, a wondrous place where houses were made of barley, sugar, and cakes, and cheese rained down from the sky. Like the mythological cities of Atlantis, El Dorado, and Tampa, Florida, Cockaigne was a utopia. Streets weren't lined with gold, but paved with pastries. In a parody of the Christian concept of heaven, the land of Cockaigne was thought of as a place where idleness and gluttony were not deadly sins. Instead, they were the noblest of attributes, and really full-time jobs. Cockaigne was thought to be a place of abundance, and not just when it came to food. Famed historian Herman Pley described Cockaigne as a place where roasted pigs wander about with knives in their backs to make carving easy, where grilled geese fly directly into one's mouth, where cooked fish jump out of the water and land at one's feet. The weather is always mild, the wine flows freely, sex is readily available, and all people enjoy eternal youth. But before you jump on kayak trying to book a trip, you should know the land of Cockaigne only exists in works of fiction, which is why medieval Italians took it upon themselves to build the next best thing. The English word carnival is related to the Italian word carnivale, which is related to the Latin words carnem levare, which means taking meat away. Early Christians would abstain from eating meat for the 40 days leading up to Easter. Today, we know this as Lent, but what they couldn't eat in meat, they made up for with everything else. Carnival feasts were always an integral part of the culture of Naples. Every Sunday, the devout, and presumably those just out looking for a good meal, were greeted with delicacies of bread and cheeses, fruit, vegetables, and sweets from all over the region. Parade floats called cucagna were meant to elicit feelings of abundance, harkening back to the mythical land of Cockaigne. These cucagna were built by the various food guilds, consisting of artisans like bakers and cheesemakers from all over the city. They decorated these floats with their wares, knowing that showing off their food on a float was great for business. Just like how the Goodyear blimp is great for tire sales, despite the fact that blimps don't actually have tires. Everything was going fine with these festivals featuring the cucagna until 1734, when an 18-year-old Spanish prince with no military experience marched an army into Naples, captured it from the ruling Austrians, and crowned himself king. King Carlos Borbón, also known as King Charles III, was eager to show his new subjects that he knew how to party. So when Carnival came around, the Bourbon King took it to an 11. Besides adding meat back into the mix, he ordered the construction of new cucagna, single-serving structures made to resemble small palaces, statues, and temples. These cucagnas would not be floats, but stationary structures, partially made of and heavily decorated with the finest delicacies imaginable. These tasty towers of meat, cheese, produce, and sweets were hastily constructed and donated throughout the city. Quickly constructed structures made of food. What could possibly go wrong? Picture this. Hundreds of Italian soldiers on horseback hold back the ravenous mob outside the Largo del Castello. A cannon fires from the Castel Nuovo. It's the proverbial starting pistol, signaling the throngs of desperate Nepalese poor to descend upon the cucagna. An older man stumbles. The crowd can't stop, and he is crushed to death under the stampeding masses as they scramble to strip away as much meat and cheese as they can stuff into their pockets, mouths, or any other orifice. Meanwhile, the wealthy elite watch from their towers, chuckling at the grotesque spectacle below. This was typical during Carnival for those participating in the looting of the cucagna, the largest of the cucagna festivals in Naples. Literally, it was the Hunger Games. And like the Hunger Games, it was conducted mainly for the sadistic amusement of the rich, who got their jollies watching the underclasses fight each other for enough food to feed their families. Occasionally, cucagna celebrations would feature live animals as part of their food displays. And if it wasn't kooky enough to have peasants fighting each other for coveted food scraps, they would also have to kill the animals, as if they were on some kind of manufactured battlefield. The live animals often included bulls, freely running through the streets, and birds, not so freely tied, or sometimes nailed, to the tops of trees. These trees became known as cucagna trees. Their trunks were greased, so only the best climbers could make it to the top and claim their crucified poultry. Sometimes a climber would make it to the top of the tree trunk to find not a chicken, but a brand new suit. Fine clothing was often used as the prize for climbing the cucaña trees. Expensive hats, shoes, and jackets were fine trophies for those who could not normally afford them. Of course, sliding down a greasy tree with a new pair of slacks may have immediately decreased their value, and without a receipt, they probably couldn't be returned. The concept of greasing up a tree and trying to climb it to the top to win a prize spread well beyond the cucaña, and in many places around the world, it continues to this day. In Malta, a popular game involves a 65-foot-long wooden beam that is attached to a pier at an angle and extended over the sea. The beam is heavily greased and a flag is attached to its end. The aim of the game is to run to the end of the beam and grab a flag without falling into the ocean. And in the United Kingdom, a greasy pole game was an annual event at the Egremont Crab Fair up until 2004, when it became too expensive to insure due to participants constantly falling off the 35-foot vertical pole. The Egremont Crab Fair could have taken a lesson from King Charles III and just set up a fund for all the inevitable injuries and deaths that would occur. Stampedes and infighting aside, since people regularly brought knives to cut away the bread and cheese from cucaña walls, as well as spears to kill the bulls and other livestock, accidents were extremely common. So instead of canceling the game, good old Charles set up a fund for the widows and children of the men who would be killed or injured during the cucaña. It's as if instead of changing football rules to make it safer, we just set up a concussion fund for future injured players. And if you want to donate, please visit concussionfoundation.org. We're not affiliated, but seems like a decent cause. Now back to the games. The looting of the cucaña proved so popular that it was soon incorporated into celebrations like Saints' Days, royal birthdays, and weddings. But not everyone approved. In fact, the Marquis de Sade, the man for which the concept of sadism is named, was horrified by what he witnessed at a cucaña event in 1776. Mr. Sadism himself called the cucaña the most barbarous spectacle that one could imagine in the world. He claimed that one cucaña structure had been intentionally collapsed to make the game more challenging, and live animals cried in agony as they hung nailed to the display. The Austrian princess and sister of Marie Antoinette, Maria Carolina, expressed similar horror when she witnessed live animals being torn apart by a hungry mob at her wedding to King Ferdinand IV, who insisted on a cucaña. Performing the Macarena doesn't seem so horrific compared to that. As shocking as it may sound, not everyone at the cucaña events was sober. In fact, cucañas frequently featured luxurious fountains spouting fine Italian wine. One such fountain was constructed for the birth of Prince Philip, the son of King Charles IV. Historical records indicate that Prince Philip was not all that impressed by the display. This was largely due to the fact that he was a newborn. The grown-ups, however, had a blast. And if you weren't all that into wine, you may have been in luck, because there were also rumors of folks diving into glorious amber lakes of beer. That gives a new meaning to the term beer goggles. Unfortunately, as the saying goes, all good and inhuman displays of conspicuous wealth must end. Despite the animal cruelty, human indignities, maimings, and deaths, the cucañas remained extremely popular with both the commoners and elites alike. But in 1764, a famine came to Naples. That year, the cucaña event was particularly chaotic, as the hungry masses were, extra hungry. The starving peasants had the audacity to race towards the precious, life-sustaining food before they were given the official signal from their king. Very uncouth. Naturally, the elites decided that a cucaña they could not control was a cucaña not worth having. And soon, the practice, much like the cucaña structures themselves, just kind of disappeared. And so, the land of Cockaigne, home of gluttony, idleness, excess, and depravity, was once again relegated to live on only in our dreams. Oh, and in Vegas. It's basically just like Vegas. After World War II, Soviet Russia and the whole of the Soviet Union found itself under the authoritarian rule of Joseph Stalin. As the Cold War progressed, leaders such as Nikita Khrushchev and Mikhail Gorbachev brought changes to the communist stronghold, but finding enough to eat remained a problem for millions. To survive, people had to get innovative in the kitchen. This often meant resorting to unconventional foods that reflected the multiculturalism of the Soviet Union, or just making do with whatever happened to be available. Today, we're going to take a look at some unconventional foods people ate to survive in Soviet Russia. Okay, so let's find out what they ate back in the US, back in the USSR.